A very warm hello to all the viewers and readers of Better Photography from a very locked down Mumbai. With me is Nilofer Khan, features writer with Better Photography, and both of us will be reading selected letters in this edition. This is the third edition of Dear Better Photography, and let me begin with an edit note that I wrote in November 2017. And this particular edition of the editor's note is very personal to me because it involves an incident that happened to me many, many years ago. So, this is my very first wedding assignment. Years ago, in the good old days of film and analog cameras, I did a few wedding photography assignments, admittedly for the money. My equipment was very bare bones, two prime lenses, one of which was a beautiful Takumar 50 mm and an adapted Russian 180 mm brass monster. The monster was losing its paint job and it actually looked like it was hand painted. And the front lens element, angled against the light, looked like it had a disease. It did have a beautifully circular diaphragm though. My camera was a battered Pentax Spotmatic F, covered in layers of insulation tape because it had horrendous light leaks. A Vivita 285, a rather amazing flash gun that continues to be sold even today, complemented this list. Its mount was glued on to the flash gun. So the mount of the flash gun was glued onto the flash gun with epoxy resin. This was the time when Nikon had just released the F90X, and I used to drool over it. They sent me a brochure in English because I had sent letters asking for it. They probably believed me to be a potential customer, although I couldn't afford it at the time. I thought the viewfinder looked so high tech, it was like the cockpit of an aircraft. I veritably ached and lusted over it, reading and rereading the brochure like a boy pouring into a dirty magazine. But I couldn't afford anything more than what I had. My client, for whom I was doing wedding photography, was the captain on a merchant navy ship and the father of the bride. He asked me if I could make do with three rolls of film, exactly three rolls of film. Not wanting to lose this job, my very first wedding photography assignment, I affirmed that I most certainly could. Well, at least he did not ask to see my camera, which a lot of clients actually do these days. It was my very first wedding photography assignment, and those were the days. It was the heydays. Well, things couldn't have gone more horribly wrong. The shutter speed dial lost all traction. Okay, so in those days, there used to be a shutter speed dial on top of the camera, and you had to rotate it. It had click stops. It lost all traction, so I had no clue what shutter speed I was on. The shutter speed dial lost all traction and started freewheeling, so I had no idea if it continued to remain at 1/60th of a second, which was the flash sync speed of the camera. I literally went by the sound that the shutter made. It sounded just about right. I pushed the dial down and rotated to make the shutter sound a little longer, so that I was absolutely sure that the flash was being captured. Next, the auto thyristor of my trusty flash gun stopped working too. It was not even measuring light correctly. I was quite lucky to notice that the flash was not changing the intensity. It was firing, at one fixed intensity. Now, for those who remember those days, this was a very serious combination of problems. And of course, I had three rolls of film to be used at both the wedding and the reception. And, you know, I did not think of buying a fourth. And there was no assistance, I was shooting alone. I shot as many frames as I dared to without using the flash, aperture absolutely wide open, choosing subjects that were very stationary and very still and interestingly lit. When I needed to use the flash, I calculated the distances and possible apertures from the tiny calculator dial on the side of the 285, and I prayed. This was, after all, the most important day of a couple's life, and I was botching things up very badly indeed. I prayed on the way to the lab too. Until that point, I had never thought of photography as a path to God, but I prayed. To my surprise, there were 42 photographs, 42, okay, out of 90, 90 frames, total 90 frames, about 100 frames available totally, 42 photographs that were correctly exposed. A number that I'm still quite proud about, given the circumstances. Some were just about passable, some were just right. A few of them had fantastic effects. A dreamy, soft, glowing bride, light trails flowing out and around the groom, a room with blurs except for the captain, looking as though he was out at sea at the helm of his ship. There was this one portrait. I remember this portrait very vividly because it still in my mind stands out so powerfully. There was this one portrait of the couple at the altar, slightly overexposed and with just a hint of camera shake. It was a profile. I shot it standing in the priest's chamber beside the altar. The bride was looking up, the groom had his head and shoulders slumped, looking down, inward. And I knew that my prayers were heard with that particular frame. Somehow I knew I could convince the father, the mother, I could convince the father, the captain. The mother of the bride still had me quite worried. She seemed the stern sort who spoke incessantly like a school teacher giving instructions. Perhaps she was a teacher. As an added measure, all 42 prints were made into enlargements after very precise instructions on cropping, toning, and colors. Some were made 3 times over. So basically, I actually made 3 photos out of one single frame by cropping it, and they became 3 separate photos in the final set. The portrait that I was talking about a little earlier, the portrait was also cropped slightly. It was converted to black and white from color. It was bleached. It was enlarged to twice the size of all the other prints, and I framed it in a light color wooden frame. I spent almost everything that I had in those days, okay, everything that I had in that set of images, okay, just to make it, because there was so much of work to be done in the darkroom, in the enlarging, in the cropping, and the framing. I spent everything, like literally my last 10 rupees was spent on it. On the day that I went to deliver, I was already late by 3 days after the promised date. There I was, a 22-year-old photographer, late beyond his deadline, confronting a captain, a Navy captain. The bride and groom had already left for their honeymoon. The house, which was full of guests earlier, was now very quiet, ominously quiet. The parents looked at my prints as I removed each from its envelope, ending with unwrapping the frame. I knew what the response was going to be, but a part of me did not know how they would take it. I knew that they would be happy, but I still was not entirely sure. Only 42 frames. The mother said that she would make us some tea and went to the kitchen. The father was smiling. The captain was smiling. You were in serious trouble, weren't you? He asked me. He, I also noticed at that point that he had used the past tense. I saw it in your face and in that ridiculous contraption that you were carrying. Well, thank you. I had my tea, made some small talk, collected my check, and I left. I did not know, I don't know, what made me more proud. Those 42 photos that did the job, or that I managed well, or that I had just collected my biggest paycheck yet through photography, or the odd satisfaction in knowing that I touched two people deeply. Over the next few years, I got 3 more assignments from people who happened to see that particular portrait hanging on their wall. There were many, many lessons that I learned on that one day of shooting. Well, this was something that I wrote several years ago. Of course, it pertains to an image It pertains to photography that I did when I was very young, when I was like 22 years old. And it was a huge lesson. It was a lesson in humility. It was a lesson in keeping a cool head on shoulders. It was a lesson on what not to do during an assignment. Okay, so I hope none of you have to ever go through this. But in those days of film, there was a huge level of uncertainty as well. Nilofer, you
I
have a letter for us?
Yeah. So also just to talk about what you like this I remember reading before I became an intern, and I was just like, damn, I cannot believe we had to go through that. And that's also like, when you're just starting out, I would panic and I would think I would also leave the job. Like after this, I wouldn't show my face anywhere.
Oh, I did panic, Nilofer. It was a lot of panic at that point of time. But you realize that when you are on the job and on an assignment, there's nothing much that you can do. You have to just go with it. So you do the best that you can. And I think that's always the case in even in today's situation. Many photographers uh, come across situations like this, but you just have to do the job,
That
to the
is
best of your
absolutely.
abilities. It's good to know what to do in those circumstances. Like I was very clear in my mind that I had to shoot very still subjects. I was very clear that I had to keep the camera extremely still. So I used every support that I could wherever I could. I had to balance out the lights and shades because I knew that I couldn't really change or play with my exposure too much. I only had aperture to play with. My shutter speed was stuck. So there were a lot of situations I was very keenly aware about, and that really helped. That awareness helped, and that knowledge helped.
Yeah, I think that's the reason you were able to do it. Like, had I been in a situation like this, I would just panic and start crying.
Well, let me also say that I had a lot of help from very close friends. Like, for instance, when I went and gave the thing for printing, I spent the entire night at the lab. Okay, even though it was a commercial lab, they allowed me to come in. They helped me frame and crop. I actually then give me test prints. So being a manual process actually helped a lot because when it's a manual process, you sort of can control a lot of things, including colors. I played with the colors like crazy. Okay, it's not just toning it deeper or saturating, but also sometimes bleaching completely. I really played with the colors. Eventually, those 42 pictures were, if you were to actually compare today's photography of those 42 pictures individually, those pictures really work.
Hmm.
But as a set, they were very diverse set. Some were very bold colors, some very rich colors, some very soft colors, muted colors, some with a lot of blurs, some, so it was crazy.
That's interesting. So I have a letter that's titled "Photographing What You Love," and this is written to us by Shalini Manjekar from Indore. So she writes, recently I had a brief chat with my photography professor. During our conversation, he discussed how not every photograph that one makes should be shared, even if we personally like them. He stressed upon being selective about what work should be uploaded and what should only remain in a folder on the desktop. I was a little surprised by his comments because aren't we always taught to do what we love? Does this mean that we judge every subject and be critical of whether it is worthy of a photograph? I make photos of things around me because I want to and because they move me on a deeper level. Maybe what my professor said was true, but I am certainly not going to let it stop me from making pictures of objects that most would regard as mundane or inconsequential. So when I read this, it reminded me of how my folder right now looks, which is just full of like pictures at home of bugs, of like wall and cobwebs and stuff like that. So wondering that when she said this, that certain pictures you don't show, but I've ended up showing this to a lot of people, thinking that hey, this is what I feel. So in a way, I mean, I don't really would agree with what the professor said in a certain way. Okay, if you are showing a body of work, let's say to get an assignment, that's a different thing. But your personal work, I think you can put all the images out there as long as you like them.
I completely agree with you, Nilofer. I have always maintained that you should be your own worst critic. When you look at your pictures, I think the most important person to decide whether it's a worthy photograph or not
Hmm.
should be you. And if that means that it could be a crack on the wall, or it could be a little space in some corner or some object gathering some dust, only you can decide whether that's a worthy photograph. And usually very personal kind of photographs, very intimate photographs, end up having that kind of mind space with other viewers as well. So it's not only the planned and the composed and the beautifully shot and on the amazing photos that get attention. It's also these tiny moments, these little moments, these very obviously unobvious kind of spaces and moments that also gets noticed. And in fact, if you ask me, I find myself actually looking at some of these photos much more than either commercial photography or other kinds of photography, simply because they happen to be very personal, and deeply touching in many ways.
Yes, I
So
do
yes,
agree.
I completely agree with you that many of these photos are uh, very moving and very different from the ordinary.
Yeah,
And the ordinary for me is actually all those glitzy photos. That's very ordinary. You know.
I totally agree. I think as long as you can you can make the reader feel what you're feeling, I think in that sense, if that's what your photograph was trying to convey, I think it's best to put it out there for everyone.
True, absolutely true. Okay, I have another letter which again resonates with the theme of our next issue. This is something that I wrote some time back. It also serves as a reminder of some of the amazing photography that was done earlier. Okay, so um, the next issue, by the way, the May issue is going to contain a feature on the World Press photo, and this is for the World Press photo of a previous edition. So I've written this after looking at those photos. The theme of this letter, that of this editorial note that I written in that particular issue, this happens to be the March 2017 issue of Better Photography. It still resonates with me today, and I think the situation that we are in right now, with us all fighting COVID-19, it sort of reflects what I had stated back then in 2017. Right on the line and not by the fringes. This year's edition of the World Press Photo Awards, meaning the 2017 edition of the World Press Photo Awards, is rather special. Apart from India's Nayan Khanolkar winning the second prize in the Natures category for his truly stunning photo titled The Big Cat in My Backyard, many of the other photographs too, are a portrayal of man in conflict with the environment. Never has there been a time in history more rife with problems that are both created by and that impact humanity on a global scale. Regardless of all the debate and criticism, I personally find this year's winners to be wonderfully deserving, sensitive, honest, and fearless, and sometimes brutal in their image making, and wonderfully adept in their craft. I would like to draw attention to these photographers, but it isn't easy to be in the front of a pistol wielding murderer, stare right at him from a few meters away, raise the camera and release the shutter, or to remain bodily exposed even as soldiers take cover while bombs go off, or to be calm and collected in the documentation of a people in turmoil, or to see a badly injured child lie quiet, shell shocked, or to compose the frame, the pieces of what were once beautiful and endangered animals, or for that matter, travel for months on end without seeing home and family. These photographers use their craft to show at times enduringly beautiful and oft uncomfortable truths. As difficult as it may be for the world at large, just as much it is for us to see some of these photos, it often irrevocably plays on the minds of the photographers as well, changing them. Having interacted with a number of award-winning senior photographers, I often hear them say, "It's the job that I love," or "It's the rush," "It's the zone." In more contemplative moments, they sometimes talk about the things, about the or that one image, that one sight that never goes away, even in sleep. We often see images that we cannot forget for years, but rarely do we remember the names of the photographers who experienced things for real and captured it in camera. They are certainly tough men and women because it is an extraordinarily difficult profession, but they are also human beings like you or me. They go about things the way they know best, as we all do, with the knowledge that it is worth working for certain important truths. It's absolutely true because a lot of our photojournalists, even today, as we speak, I know that there are photographers who officially, with government permission, are out on the streets, endangering themselves, endangering even perhaps even their own families to make those pictures of what is going on in India, even as we are locked in at home. It's not an easy job being a photojournalist. It takes a certain amount of passion and a tremendous amount of courage to be a photojournalist. And to all the photojournalists, to all the people who are out there who are on the front lines, to all those medical workers, sanitation workers, to the municipal corporations, to the hospital staff, to the nurses, to all of you, a very, very heartfelt thank you. You are the heroes of the day, and we will not forget you.
Like when you said a lot of people who are out there, like recently in the media it came out that a lot of journalists were tested positive. It just so happens that a few of my friends are also in the same situation right now, and they were all shooting out there, and suddenly they are tested positive. They're asymptomatic, and they're like really, in a way, they're scared because they've already interacted with a lot of people, including their family. So they don't know what is going to happen now, but they're just hopeful that things sort of calm down at this point.
Yes, hopefully, I think we are in the front lines. We know what's going on, because a lot of our friends are journalists. We belong to a media company, and we see our own media counterparts out there working, and they see the truth. They see what's going on. Um, of course, there India is faced with a lot of issues, a lot of very significant problematic issues. But at the same time, I think all of us are very, very proud, not just because of the heroes who are out there on the front lines, the people who are really working to bring us the news, the people who are working with patients, the people who are working to contain the situation, but also because of all the ordinary people, all the normal people who are currently in lockdown, who are following the lockdown. Uh, I think that it's very important for us to acknowledge them as well. Uh, More than anything, I think it's important for us to remain very compassionate. Compassionate because there are a lot of people out there who are on the fringes, who are in a situation which they cannot control. They don't have food. They don't have even access to cooking food, even if they get it. They have children. They are struggling, and we must be compassionate as far as possible. As far as possible, let's actually take steps to ensure that the people around us, at least, the people who were working for us in our homes, the people who collect our garbage, the people who work in our compounds as sweepers and as caretakers and as people who clean stuff, and ensure that life for us is comfortable. So let's ensure that those people at least are safe. Because they depend on us, and just as equally we depend on them. Let's ensure that those people are safe.
Absolutely. So my letter, it's titled "Blurring Out Captions." I remember this is something that you mentioned. We had a discussion over this before also. It's by Shubhankar Sharma from Kanpur. He writes, when two people see an image, they can come to different conclusions. It's all about perception. In the beginning, whenever I would look at photographs, I would always try to avoid viewing the captions. Gradually, I completely stopped reading them as I wanted to perceive what the photograph was trying to tell me, rather than what the photographer thought about it. Even throughout the history of art, several artists believe in giving the audience the opportunity to interpret their work on their own accord. One of them was the famous painter and sculptor Marcel Duchamp. He believed that What audience thought about a piece of work was equally as important as the work itself. He said, it is not only the artist who performs the creative act, the audience is equally as important as the artist. They add their own contribution to the work by understanding its inner qualifications. I feel that contemporary photographers should embrace this line of thought. Nowadays, when people shoot photographs, they do not leave unexplained elements, thus, not facilitating thought provoking discussions. I think that photographers should come out with their images, which actually involves the reader, rather than considering them as mere spectators. After all, photography originates from art and borrows a lot from its aesthetics. I remember how initially you and I also had this discussion where a lot of photographers would refrain from adding captions to their images. They would keep it as untitled. Like untitled is the became the norm. So when I read this and I was just like, yeah, this is. I remember interviewing a lot of people who also said this is the same reason why they avoid uh, putting a caption, because you are actually telling the audience to think rather than them interpreting the work on their own.
Well, Nilofer, I think that that's correct. But on the other hand, uh, captioning itself is a form of art. Let's not forget that. In fact, in many schools abroad, especially in the Western, in the US and in the UK, the very art of captioning is an entire course on its own. People have to learn how to caption and title their photos to make it presentable. This is something that is extremely important for our readers in India to realize that a caption is not just a caption. It's not just something that you do to draw attention to something in the photo, or to speak about something. Uh, at the same time, there is a very strong reason to leave a photo untitled. There must be a very strong reason to leave a photo untitled. In every single image, especially when it comes to documentary or
Hmm.
with, let's say, photojournalism, the idea of a caption with every image is actually quite important because it also tells a story. You know, on the other hand, a bad caption or badly maintained, a badly mentioned caption takes away a lot from the photo. In those cases, it's best to leave the photo untitled, let the viewer get whatever it is that the viewer can get from the photograph. It's very true that there are always two people in a photo. After all, the photo is being shot for it to be viewed. And if the viewer is gets the idea of the photographer, then the photographer has done the correct job in conveying it the way he's supposed to convey it. You know. Photography is not just a job, though. Photography, I think, is also much more than that. Photography is a form of expression. If you consider photography as a form of expression, then it need not necessarily be important that the viewer get the idea behind the photo, because for the artist, it's more important that the message has been conveyed as the photographer has seen fit, as the photographer intends the message to go through, uh, intends to show what is shown just the way he has seen it in his mind. So I think that is more critical for a lot of photographers rather than the viewer being a part of the equation. So very often the viewer is not a part of the equation. On the other hand, a lot of photography is very practical. I would say 90% of all photography is practical. And if the practicality of photography is to be taken into consideration, then the viewer is the biggest part of the image, because you're shooting for the viewer at the end of it. So that's what I think about captioning or not captioning, and the presence of the viewer in the image, of the viewer in the image.
Yeah, sometimes I do caption like if I'm shooting, considering like right now I'm more into experimental photography. So sometimes the image I know in a tiny screen will really not make sense because it's just the phone. So I just put one word that a person can relate to understand what I was thinking when I was making a certain photograph. So maybe that is something that I do where I'm not directly leading them into what the image is, but at the same time can give them an idea of what exactly is happening.
Let me ask you a question, Nilofer, especially regarding this. When you go through, let's say, Instagram, or when you go through Facebook, particularly looking at other people's work, other photographers,
Hmm.
okay, do you often tend to stop at the image because the image is very, very powerful, or because the caption is very powerful?
It's definitely the image.
I think same here. It's definitely the image. On the other hand, even if the caption is very powerful, okay, but the caption is very long-winded, or the caption, let's say, for instance, the caption is, a poem, for instance, or the
Hmm.
caption is, a bit of fact, okay, that must be actually mentioned. Do you go through the entire caption if it is too long?
Not. I haven't gone through the caption unless it's like it's somebody talking about a part of their life, because those captions sometimes tend to be really long. So that I've really enjoyed reading, but very factual ones, I don't think so. I have read throughout.
Okay, that. I suppose the readers can take away from that as well. Not the captions not always need to be very lengthy or very artistic or very poetic. It can be very simple. It can be to the point. In fact, it is often better if the caption is to the point. On the
Hmm.
other hand, there are certain captions that I read, for instance, by sometimes National Geographic
Hmm.
post photos with very
Hmm.
lengthy captions. I actually do tend to read the entire caption, you know, particularly because it is informing me about the planet or the environment or of something which I have interest with. I think everybody has got their interests, and
Hmm.
they will choose to go with their interests at the end of it.
Absolutely.
So yes. And so, viewers, that brings us to the close of this session of Dear Better Photography. Stay tuned. We will have some more. At the same time, please don't forget to tune in to some of our other properties. We have Q&A with Sridhar Kunte. On Saturday at 6 p.m., I am going live with Joseph Radick, the famous wedding photographer. For it's a live session, and I'm going to be asking him certain very pertinent questions about his background, about his photography, and about his ideas of the future. That's at 6 p.m. on this coming Saturday. So stay tuned, and as always, stay committed, stay safe, and stay compassionate during these difficult times. Thank you.